Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome cinematographer Benedict Spence B.S.C, who joins us to talk about his work on the Netflix show Eric. Benedict will talk us through shooting a show set in 80s New York and the hurdles he faced shooting scenes with a 7-foot puppet. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Benedict. Hi, Benedict. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for the invite, Rob.
We're here to talk about Eric, which has just come out on Netflix. What can I say? I really enjoyed the show. When you think it's going to zig, it slightly zags. There's a lot more to it in terms of story compared to what is shown in the trailers, which is nice because you'd think sometimes trailers give a bit too much away, but everybody has a nice moment to shine in the show. How have you found the reception towards the show? I noticed as well that you kind of took over the British Society of Cinematographers Instagram page and kind of get to showcase talking about your work. Plus, one thing that made me laugh quite a lot was I'll be the bit where you say I'll be lurking in the comments for any questions.
So where do I start with it all? I mean, I guess Eric has just came out a week ago. I guess from when we're talking, and yeah, it's an interesting moment when a show comes out. I don't do a lot of dramas. I do sort of one per year. So this moment where it comes out, where a show comes out, where something you've toiled on comes out is a big moment, which I'm not used to because it only happens to me once a year, and it's only happened to me for the past 6 or 7 years. So I've only had a handful of goes at it. I guess the reception for the show has been good. It's not been amazing, if I'm being totally honest. It's been solid, solid. 4-star reviews, some 3s, a couple of 5s. But I find the reception for my work seems to be pretty good, which makes me very happy. I really like the show. I think it's a show with a lot of heart. But as we all sort of knew in prep, it's sort of bit marmitey. If you love it or you don't love it, and I think that's what sort of happened. But look, from my end of things, people seem to like it. I don't know. I seem to have tricked them with shallow focus and lots of grain. But that's great as long as they're happy. And yeah, I joined the British Society. I was invited to join the British Society of Cinematographers last year, which was a very exciting moment for me. And yeah, they invited me to host their Instagram channel for the week, for the launch week of Eric. I really like Instagram. I mean, I don't like it. I think social media is a terrible thing. But for me, in terms of self-promotion, I think it's a very useful thing. And I really enjoy talking about how I shot stuff and what I did. And I think I wish when I first started working, I wish there was something like Instagram to be able to receive that information from more experienced TOPs. So here I am being sort of hopefully the middle of my career, not entirely experienced, but with some degree of experience. I like to be able to give some of that information back to people, and I hope I make some silly shit jokes whilst I do it.
Well, I think when you get to host these sort of things, because I think looking at when people talk about their work and you see the behind the scenes and you see how it's basically like from page to screen in a way, and how I think it's how cool it looks as well in terms of how somebody would have created the shots. I think it's like, for example, I think one of the posts is about when Benedict and Benedict Cumberbatch, should I say, because you're both called Benedict, sorry, and Eric are doing the dancing in the club. And when you see the behind the scenes of that, it's really cool. And I feel like sometimes as like a society, we've missed out on those DVD extras of how things are made. And now we see it on social media. I think people are kind of getting more and more into it.
I mean, I used to love those DVD extras. I used to love directors' commentaries, and I remember on Ghostbusters there was this the Ghostbusters DVD when it first came out. There's this sort of Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing with sort of silhouettes of cast and director there, like they're watching the film with you, telling you stories about how it happened. I mean, I still feel like I wish there was something like that on Instagram where you just sit there and bang on about the show, it'd probably be quite boring, to be fair, and it probably be just me moaning about it. But yeah, you know what? It's Instagram is an amazing way of getting my story out there, and two, just I'm a great believer that nobody pops out of the womb with creative knowledge. I don't believe in sort of innate talent, but I do believe in passing information on to the next generation. And the sort of the next generation of cinematographers, if they can take the information which I have and stand on my shoulders, like I've stood on the shoulders of all the cinematographers that have come before me, whose work I've watched and taken in, then I'd love to pass on that knowledge. I'd love to make the next generation a little bit better than me. And I hope then the generation after them will be a little bit better than them. And eventually, you sort of got some kind of, ultimate pinnacle of cinematography in about 10 generations time, maybe. Who knows, if that makes any kind of sense.
I'd still it does, because it's like, what do you leave to the next person about what you've learned and the mistakes, or
Yeah.
how to light certain scenes, for example.
For me, look, I'm the reason I know how to do stuff. Experience, you might call it, and I've been working for 20 years now. Experience is born from fucking it up, from making. I don't know how you feel about swearing on your podcast, but experience is born from messing it up, from making mistakes, and then eventually not making those mistakes anymore. And I know. To a degree, I'm very much in the middle of my career, I hope. But to a degree, I know I appear to know what I'm doing because I've made so many mistakes. And if I can help tell people about those mistakes so they don't have to make them, well, that's even better. I can tell them how to do things, how I've done things, and maybe that'll save them from screwing up as many times as I have.
Yeah, and also, like, as you said, that's the only way you can grow, is by making mistakes and seeing how things progress, especially when you move across from your career, because you don't want to be making, if you don't learn from those mistakes as well, you're not really going to grow it.
That's how you learn, by messing up and not doing it again. Hopefully, you only mess up once, each in each way. But yeah, that is definitely how one gets better.
Yeah.
Or they get better by watching my Instagram and learning all about it, and follow me at Benedict_Spence_DOP. What's that Instagram?
Smooth, very smooth. How did the project come about for you, and what is it that made you want to take it on?
So I got the call about Eric from my good friend Lucy Forbes, who is the director of Eric. I have known Lucy for a terrifyingly large amount of time. I think we worked it out as 15 or 17 years or something like that, something awful like that. We both started we both come from a factual entertainment background, so sort of reality TV, and that's where we first met in the mid 2000s. We were shooting a show I was shooting a show she was producing called Orange Playlist, where Jane Middlemiss would interview celebrities about the soundtrack to their life, sponsored by Orange, on Friday night on Channel 4 at 11 p.m. And we met and we got on and we worked together a little bit in that world. And then I think one day I did a short film with her, and her co-director, Andrew Chaplin, also a good old friend of mine and a director who I still work with to this day. That got them their first agent. This is a long-winded version of this story. That job got them their first agent, that short film, their first commercials agent. And then I started to shoot commercials with them in the sort of late 2000s, early 2010s. And then around 2017, I think it was, Lucy asked me to come and shoot a pilot TV show in Wales with her, a show called In My Skin, which was a 1 hour, 30-minute pilot for the BBC Three. And at the time, I thought, oh God, I was doing some okay commercials. I thought, oh, do I really want to go to Wales? It was kind of towards winter. I thought, oh, I can't really be asked, but Lucy's a really good friend of mine, so yeah, why not? So I went out there and shot that, and it was an amazing experience. It was a fantastic show, and that went on to win as a pilot. I think it won like best drama at the Welsh BAFTAs, and it won sort of 3 Welsh BAFTAs or something like that, which was pretty good for doubly so for a pilot, the first pilot to ever do that, I believe. And off the back of that, I told you this is long-winded. Off the back of that, Lucy got a show called End of the Fucking World, second season of that, which she invited me on, and that did very well. I got Emmy nominated for that, and the show won a BAFTA, Best Drama at the TV BAFTAs. And then off the back of that, we did a show called This Is Going to Hurt, which we shot across pandemic, which was a great show to work on, great fun show to work on. I mean, off the back of that, she was looking for a next project, and she got a call from Sister Pictures, who produced our last project. This is going to hurt, and she said, "I got this new script in. It's all set in 1980s New York. There is a puppeteer whose son goes missing. There's a cop who's looking for the son. Oh, and there's also a 7 foot high furry monster thing in it called Eric. And the show's called Eric. Do you want to? This seems like a good idea. It's written by Abby Morgan, who's a fantastic experienced writer. Would you like to come and shoot it, maybe?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that sounds crazy. That sounds a bit weird." And also, it's 1980s New York. I mean, who doesn't want to film something with that as a backdrop, with the textures of that world? And so, yeah, I did my meetings and did my stuff, and I got the job, and we went and filmed it. So that's how I got the job. Essentially, just I knew Lucy for a very long time. So it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah, in a way, yes, but I think it's also because you did such a good job as well. It's what you know as well.
I mean, ultimately, sort of, I think I like long-term collaborators. I like who I like, and Lucy is truly a good friend of mine and a really good collaborator. And if you're on set with the two of us, it's often thrown at us that we finish each other's sentences off. We don't even finish sentences to each other. We talk in a sort of our own language where we talk in a weird clipped way. We will talk to each other like our own sort of weird machine language of getting through the day. And if you're on a film set and you're stressed and it's hard work and you're trying to be as creative as possible in a really uncreative way, having someone who you know really well, who is a good friend of yours, who you know has your back and you have their back, that's invaluable. It's priceless to have that on set. So, I'm lucky enough to be able to gently, in a way, pick and choose what projects I want to dive in on, and why would I not want to jump in on a project with a really good friend of mine? So yeah, it's and those sort of those long-term relationships are really what, as a DOP, keeps you employed as well, which is a big part of being a DOP, is actually doing it. So sort of yeah, that's how I got the job, and hopefully Lucy will employ me again.
I think as well the when you say about working on set and finishing each other's sentences, I think of one of the scenes from The Wire where they go into the apartment where they're reinvestigating the murder of someone, and all they say for like the 5 minute scene is like "fuck," and they're like "fuck," and it's like that's what I can imagine you two on set, just like the small you say one word to one another, and you just think, yeah, well, we know what we need to do, or it's just like, oh, we need to do this,
Yeah.
or we need to do that bit.
Yeah, because we've and you hope it doesn't make you complacent, and that's the thing you got to work against, is not becoming complacent because it's your mate there, and we just do what we did last time round. Hopefully, each time we do a job, we try and push it and try and move the needle in a different direction, and so you've got to be careful of complacency, but also it allows you. I got online film sets are stressful places. They are long, stressful days compared to lots of industries, not compared to like being a doctor or whatever, but compared to a lot of industries, they're busy, stressful places. And yeah, you just want your mate there, really. You want your mate who's good at their job, but you also want, if you can get both of them, then that's surely a thing to hold on to.
Yes, and makes it so much easier as well if you have your mate there to push you along and help you along, or if you're down, they'll help you pick you up. Best sort of person to have in the trenches.
Absolutely, it is.
With the show having a sort of a period setting, where did you begin your research? Were there specific films that you looked at, specific photographers or paintings that you wanted to grab inspiration from?
So I guess, I mean, number one, 1980s New York feels like every single person roughly my age has a sort of image of 1980s New York burns into their mind. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to New York, but you drive from the airport to New York and you see this skyline, and it feels really familiar. And everything about sort of New York feels really familiar because because it's featured so heavily in our culture and what the sort of media that most people I know, including myself, have ingested over the years. It's film after film after film set in 1980s New York, or early 90s New York. It's the sort of diet which I grew up on, having said that, I guess one of the things I was really keen to do on Eric was to not shoot something which was lit like an old 80s film, but it definitely had to feel like it was from the past. So I guess for me, that was that was my sort of initial approach was this has to feel like something from the past, but I want to light it and shoot it like a modern TV show. I don't want to light it with old lights and shoot it with old lenses. And I don't want sort of old lighting, 3-point lighting and things like that. I don't want to make a noir. I don't want to make anything which feels, which sort of has that sort of almost pastiche thing, quality about it. But what I want to do is it definitely has to feel of the period. So in terms of what we looked at, I mean, we looked at sort of dozens of films. I mean, and things like we looked at, French Connection, Taxi Driver, all these. There's so many films, and we looked at a whole bunch. I guess there's, and I guess what we did in our production office as well. So if we started shooting in Budapest, and we printed off dozens and dozens, or maybe even hundreds of references, anything which we found which we liked, printed them off, put them on the walls of the production office. And our production office was a sort of a room about sort of 20 feet by 12 feet. And it was just covered in every kind of picture you can imagine of things that we liked mostly from New York. Some things referencing certain scenes in the show, but you just tried to surround ourselves with 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s New York, and images which reminded us of that. I don't think we settled on any one specific reference at all. I guess we just tried to soak our eyes and our brain in it. So yeah, I don't think there was a single one standout reference. But with 1980s New York in our as the backdrop for Eric, we had a lot of stuff to look at. And I think as I find personally, as I start to prep a show, it sits in my head all the time. So I'm there, brushing my teeth in the morning, and something will pop in my head, a reference, a thought, a memory of something. I'll write it down. I'll find that image. I'll dig out an image somewhere. So sort of you kind of I sort of seep myself in imagery when I prep, and then all day long things pop in my head and I scribble them down and I try and dig them out later on. And a lot of them I just put in the bin because they're bad ideas. But it's amazing what little things just pop in your head and go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Because you sort of seep yourself in it. It's a very hard thing. I don't think one can just sit down and go, what is this image? And you just pull it out of your head and go, yes, that's the perfect thing. I think you have to really sort of just bombard yourself with it, live and breathe and eat 80s New York for a bit. And then it sort of starts to come to you.
I guess because, as you said, we have that sort of image of New York sort of ingrained in our mind, just because there's so much out there in terms of films, TV shows, books, and documentaries. I think it can be very easy just to get sucked into a certain way of how it's looking, and you kind of just start copying other people's stuff rather than thinking for yourself about how we can do this and how we can really present the city in itself. I find the research part of people's jobs probably one of the most interesting areas and aspects, because that's where somebody sort of has like a Rubik's Cube, and that's where they start putting the pieces together of like how each thing will look and line up. And then also selfishly, when somebody recommends a film or an artist to look at, and can Google it and start looking at their work and get some inspiration as well. And also on top of that, I like how you're saying, well, oh, I've got an idea, you scribble it down and then sort of go from there to see if it's a good one or a bad one, or if it doesn't work. Again, with your mind sort of working organically, I think that's really interesting to hear, and how sometimes, stuff will work, some stuff won't work, but it's always, you start having that sort of blank canvas to sort of allow yourself to find what's going to work for the show.
Yep, absolutely. And then you have all these fantastic ideas, and then the schedule comes in, and you go, "Oh, there's no way we can do any of those things. Shit, what can we do? How can we make this work in the time we've been given?" And that's the sort of crunch time. That's also the exciting time as well, when you go your ideas and your thoughts and things, the wants hit the wall of reality and schedule, and that's when you got to really think hard.
Yes, and also when the fact is that you might need to do a couple of pages a day shooting wise, or even 5 pages. It's like, how do we do this the most effective way possible?
And I think for me that's where it gets really exciting, is because you have the form, you have the thing that you want to achieve, you have the creative desire, and then that collides with the function, with the schedule, with the size of a location, or with the requirements for the scene, or with the hours because there's a kid involved in the scene and they have to finish at a certain time. And so you've got to marry the form and the function together to create something. And I think if you're trying to push in a style of shooting and a way of making a show into a schedule which it just doesn't work for, or whatever, that's when you fail. And I think, for example, Lucy and my last two shows, This Is Going to Hurt, which was very lively, had every single shot was handheld bar one or two, had a camera moving around, following people through operations, the hospital doorways, all sorts of things like that, glued to our main character, Ben Whishaw, taking him through sets and floors and all sorts. Versus, and that worked for the script, and that worked for the time we had, and that worked for everything, and it felt like form and function teed up. And the opposite end of the spectrum, that was End of the Fucking World, which was the script was very minimalist, the show was minimalist. We shot in a very minimalist way. We barely moved the camera. We shot on about 2 different lenses. We did some very simple stuff. We never tilted the camera. There's also loads of little rules we had, and we kept it very, very simple. And I hope that we told the story in the right way for that as well.
And again, it's the mental gymnastics that people have to do on a film set that we as general audience won't realize, like the amount of time a child could be on set, the time you can have a location or the build or even the space, for example, to work in. That is something that we wouldn't realize, but then there's people like the first AD who have to think about these things and somehow make it all work.
That's also falls to my director and me as well. We don't, most locations you're in for a couple of days at the most, and you have to film every single scene that's scheduled in that location, and you don't overrun, you don't do overtime, you have a set length of day, and you have to film absolutely everything to a standard, and you have to cover everything. And if you miss a shot of one of the actors saying the words, that's not going to be in the show. So you have to get every single one of the actors saying all the words in the right place, lit in a certain way, feeling a certain way, and you don't get to come back the next week because it costs £100,000 to come back the next week. So you have to finish on time. So you have to do all this creative stuff, and you have to give it a feel, and you have all your references that you've got, and you have all the shots that you want to get, and you have all this mood you want to bring, and this lighting you want to do, and all these things that you want to do, and you have to do it on time, on budget, and on schedule, and finish exactly at 7 p.m. Otherwise, you have to answer to the producer, and the producer says, why on earth did you overrun? It'll mess up tomorrow. Or why didn't you complete? Why didn't you finish the scene? So that's one of it's not a joy. I wouldn't quite call it a joy of filmmaking, but the excitement of filmmaking is you've got to do all this creative stuff, and you have to do it on time, on budget, and it has to be right when you do it the first time. So that's the sort of twitchy, exciting thing. The sort of the art of making it look nice and giving it a mood, mixed in with the technicalities of lenses, cameras, track, and the clock, which ticks all day long until you finish and you have to walk away from it all.
Basically feels like as soon as you step on, it's like a countdown. We need to do this. We need to do that.
It's exactly what it is, and exactly what it is. And you mentioned page count, and so I don't know if people listening to this will know what that is. So when you have you have your call sheet in the morning every day, which is everyone's names on it and everyone's roles, and it also says what scenes you've got to shoot, and at the bottom it adds all these scenes up, and it has a page count, and that's the number of pages that you have to film, pages of script. And on a light day, maybe it's a couple of pages. On a heavy day, maybe it's 5 pages, and each page equates to roughly a minute of screen time, and that's what you've got to do in the day, and you don't not do it, you don't half do it, you do all of that, and you have to do that work. And there are no excuses if you come back at the end of the day and go, we didn't do it. But you're not going to be best pleased. The production company's not going to like you. They're not going to employ you again. The executive producers aren't going to be happy with you. The writer's going to hate you. The producer's going to be furious. And then the first AD is going to be angry because they've got to reschedule some pickups or something. So, it's sort of that page count and the work you've got to do each day. You have to feather your creativity. You have to go, if it's low page count, if you've got lots of time, great. You can spend time lighting, and you can put these cranes in and big camera moves and things like that. Or if you've got a very busy day, you've got to feather that right down and go, we just have to complete this day because this location costs £500,000 or whatever it is, and we've got to film it. And there's plenty of days like that on Eric. Plenty of days where you're like, wow, this is a lot to film. and yeah, and you've got to kind of make it good at the same time. And that's the problem. You can't just have a day where you go, oh, we just make the stuff look shit. Don't worry about it. We just blitz through it. And that's why it's good having a director on your side, a director who you know, and I assume why directors like a DOP they know, because you're in together. You go, this is a brutal day, this is a really hard day. We've got to make this good, and we've also got to make the day. And that's the real trick.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think one of the days that I've done, I think the most pages we did, I think between like 12 and 13 pages.
Horrible.
Yeah, which is just like, yeah, mental. But we managed it somehow.
Yeah, you always manage it. And even if it means you stand there, you stand there, you stand there, put a camera on each person, hit record and go for it. And look, ultimately, people, the magic of the edit and the magic of a TV show and putting it all together is people don't notice, hopefully. And use every single when you've got a heavy day like that. I've only done 12 pages, but I've done 10 pages easy. The trick is people not to notice when it's all edited together. What you don't want to do is have someone going on Twitter going, yeah, Eric was great, but apart from this one scene which looked like shit, did they run out of time or something?
Oh yeah, there'll be definitely people who you could pick that up. There's always someone who knows how to. They'll always pick it up just because streaming now you could go frame by frame. This was back in the day. If you didn't record it in VHS tape, then that was it. You would be
Yeah.
able to pick these things up.
Here's a little bit of information for you though. Do you know Netflix? Do you know about Netflix quality control?
No.
So what happens? So Netflix, I don't think this is a trade secret. In fact, it's definitely not a trade secret. Netflix, when you have graded a TV show, and they split the picture up into four corners, four quadrants of normal HD image, and they send each of those quadrants to be watched by a person looking for quality control, looking for booms in shots, things which don't belong there, Starbucks cups in the back of frame, things like that. So each person will sit. Some poor soul out there has watched the top left-hand corner of 6 hours of Eric looking for booms and Starbucks cups and things like that, which sounds like punishment to me, but I'm sure we get paid for it.
Oh, what a funny job. What a funny thing.
Yeah, strange job that we create in media.
Yeah. I wonder how you'd introduce that in like parties and stuff. But going back to the show itself, New York is always going to play a big part and always be a character in the show. How do you go about shooting the show and incorporating the city as a character in itself? Obviously, this comes down into production design, set decorating, and also costumes, and then also supporting background artists and cast. But as a DOP, how do you want to capture the essence of the city and be truthful to how it was during those times?
So I guess as a DOP, you don't work in a vacuum. So you have your director there who has a vision and who wants to do something in a certain way. You also have your production designer as well, or production designer has you're as a director of photography or cinematographer, you are sort of on parity with the production designer in terms of rank. The production designer looks after art departments. They're in charge of everything that appears on the screen. I'm in charge of how that's lit and how that's shot, but they're in charge of the things and the set builds, the sets. And we had a fantastic production designer, Alex Holmes, who was on Eric. And so, they begin to, as you start prep, you start conversations with them. They have ideas, you have ideas. It's a very sort of creative bouncing around process of thoughts and ideas. They normally have a bigger team than the DOP. Normally it's in prep, it's just me, my gaffer might come in occasionally. Whereas arts department have a team of dozens of people already there drawing images and coming up with thoughts. But to working with the production designer is essentially the DOP's best friend during production, and it's really important to work with them and start to see eye to eye with them. In terms of New York in Eric, I mean, you've got sort of a palette of infinite colors there. You've got every single option of light and mood you can imagine, and the script bounces around as well. The script takes you from sort of family apartments to underground tunnels attached to the subway, which homeless people live in, to sort of millionaires' apartments, dozens of stories above. Takes you to sort of millionaires' apartments, 30 floors up in a Manhattan skyscraper, into TV studios. Or the script goes all over the place, and so each one of those locations gives you another option on lighting and mood, and there is I don't think New York is just one color. 1980 New York is dozens of different colors, dozens of different places. There's a club called the Lux in the show. You know, amazing opportunity to do fun lighting things, to give a different texture, to give a different mood. So for me, the New York and Eric wasn't one look, it was every look. It was all sorts of different looks, and that's a fantastically exciting thing as a DOP. You go, oh, this is brilliant. I'm not just shooting a single thing set in the desert, which how many looks are in the desert? Maybe, you know, a handful. It's a smorgasbord of looks. And so yeah, that's what I really enjoyed about Eric, giving all those looks. I mean, I feel in terms of how you prep and decide what those looks are. I mean, a perfect example, you know, it's essentially, as a DOP, how do I decide, reference, and choose what those looks should be? It's often based, I try to base it on character, and I try and base it on story, and I try and base it on the mood one wants to set. So a couple of examples might be the Luck, for example, this club. Superficially, it's a big New York club, lots of cool people there. So it's a sort of jazzy, exciting 80s club, but actually there's also a sort of undercurrent of seediness and potentially child abuse and all sorts of things there. So sort of there's definitely two sides to the Lux, and hope to show that with the lighting. There's a sort of a definite split between this sort of, there's reds and there's blues, and there's sort of fire and ice, this yin and yang of the club. Just wanted to show there's two sides to this place. So yeah, just little simple things like that. Plus also that looks cool as well. You know, warm and cool is a nice color contrast, and it looks good to your eye. Another example is maybe the Andersons. Another example is Robert Anderson's apartment. So Robert Anderson is the father of Benedict Cumberbatch in the film. He has a big Manhattan apartment. And I was trying to figure out how to make that feel a little bit different. And it was a small thing, but essentially the character is very, very rich and a bit of an arse. And I looked into when fluorescent bulbs were first invented. They were invented in the early 80s. And I thought, well, look, if you've got more money than sense, and there's this newfangled thing, you might get CFL bulbs, compact fluorescent bulbs, and put them in all your fancy lamps in your fancy apartment, because they're the new thing. No one these days generally has CFL bulbs in their lamps because it looks a bit green and cold and not very nice, and everyone wants a nice warm lamp. But what it did was put CFL bulbs in all the practicals in this set, and they all go they're a bit cold and a bit green. And it works quite well. And even in the day, there's no warmth in that apartment. In the daytime scenes, instead of having warm practicals, they're really cold looking with a little bit of a green spike in them. And it feels like it suits character. It makes that location feel a bit different, and it sort of also ties in. So every single location, every single character, you try and come up with a sort of a lighting idea, which gives a layer, gives a texture, gives a layer, but also goes with character or story or something. And that's what one tries to do in prep. Try to take a character or a location and put an idea on it, and working, you know, things like those light bulbs and things like the lighting in the Lux as well, because a lot of that, so much of that is built into the set. You have to talk to the production designer, you have to discuss about how you build these lights in, how you build this color and tone of lighting into the set. You want to check they're happy with it as well, because you don't want to ruin their work. But also if they like it, then you know, ideally you see eye to eye and you can move together and work together for it. And certainly Alex Holmes was incredibly open to thoughts and ideas and collaborating like that.
So there's a lot to take in from that answer. And
yeah, sure. It's a big answer.
No, it's not that. It's just there's so much to take in, because it's really, really interesting. And the sort of, you know how like audiences, you're kind of conditioned to the final look and you kind of think that's normal, this, that, the other, and you don't get taken out of it. And that's how it felt during Eric. And what I noticed a lot is like when you go to the Andersons' home, it's very warm. It feels very bright and a very sort of that homely feel. And then obviously once you go to Anderson Senior's home, you've obviously created a specific look to make it feel cold and sterile in a way. And then the Lux as well, it has to have that. Has to be cool. It has to have that fluorescent sort of lighting as well, and that sort of.
But even within the same location, you know, for example, the Anderson's apartment, so not the Anderson Senior, the Vincent and his family. When we begin our story, with Edgar and Cassie and Vincent, when we're first there, there's a lot. You're right. There's a lot of warmth there. That's, warm tungsten practicals. We lent into that warmth, and even though things aren't really great with them, at least we, showing that home in a sort of in a warm way. As Edgar, I don't want to give anything too much away about the show, but as Edgar the kid disappears, I think the next time we see it is sort of at dusk, I think, and that gives us this opportunity to push all this cool light in, and create a sort of a place for sort of greater shadows, and just make the whole thing feel less friendly. And then I think the next day, maybe it might be in episode 2 or maybe it's in episode 1. It's a morning, but it's a very cool, flat morning. It's sort of overcast day morning. So, I think as what you do is when you're reading the script as a DOP, I will go, well, what could be the mood here? What's the weather here? And that's a question I always ask myself. What is the weather? And what would the ideal weather be to tell this story? Is it a flat, cold, cool lighting, overcast day? Is it a warm, sunny afternoon? What would the ideal weather be like to how bright should those windows feel to aid the mood of this scene? And actually, one of the things which I often do with Lucy is to go do a sort of day, night, dusk pass of the script, and go, can we tweak the story order a little bit here in a script? Maybe can we push this into a dusk, or push this somewhere else, or make this a rainy day, or make this a sunny afternoon? What can we do here? Because weather dictates so much, whether you're inside or outside. Weather dictates so much about how a day feels, how a moment in life feels. That actually I really like to try and check time of day or weather and try and build that a little bit into it somehow. And we did a lot of that in Eric, just little tweaks in the script, tweaks in time of day in the script, not changing any of the words or anything, but just going, oh, this is a bit duskier, this is a bit nightier. Where does this sit, to help aid tell the story, and help aid explain the character's mood.
Even that's like a little detail about the weather and how do you sort of want to present it on screen and create that mood. I think it's, again, very clever, because you're not, like, audience members, you just think it's normal, it's natural, but it's like, no, but as us who are creating a visual medium, working in a visual medium, how are we going to portray that mood? How are we going to make that feel? How can we really flex our creativity on this to present what the character's feeling, and not bash the audience over the head with how they're feeling as well?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I guess it's one of the things which, when people don't work in TV, sometimes they don't quite understand that nothing is by accident. There's happy accidents, don't get me wrong, but everything requires a creative decision. What color is that lamp? That somebody's decided that. Where is the light coming from? Somebody's decided that. What angle are we shooting at? Somebody's had to make a conscious decision about that. What time of day is this? Somebody's made a decision, whether it's a script writer writing down dawn, or whether it's a DOP going, why don't we make this a bit more blue hour in the morning, or whatever it is. And there's been a lot of chats about it every single time, I'm sure.
Yeah, and there's probably been meetings upon meetings about how things would look,
Most certainly.
which again, people will not be able to comprehend about it. What I'm curious to know about as well, whilst working on the show, is the working with kids and working with humans. You can kind of get a sense of where the cameras can be placed and the positioning of it because of your height. When you introduce a 7-foot puppet into the whole shooting process, what sort of hurdles do you need to jump to make sure that with the camera positioning that they're not being cut, their head's not being cut off, or there's some sort of like height perception for the actors to work with as well?
So I've worked with children and animals many times over the years. I've worked with normal heighted human beings and shorter human beings as well, over the years many times. It's my first time working with a walk around puppet, so a big puppet. I've done puppetry stuff before, but it's my first big puppet. It was a massive pain in the ass. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. Ollie Taylor, who is the lead puppeteer of Eric, who is fantastic. So let me try and explain this in a way. So he goes in the big puppet, the Eric puppet. He then puts on a FPV drone goggle. So essentially, it's like a VR headset where he can't see anything other than what this headset is showing him. And then they put the Eric head on him. So into that headset, we feed 2 or 3 action cameras like GoPros, essentially, like little cameras, and we feed an image from my camera as well, the show camera, and he can see nothing other than a couple of wide shots of the set. So he can see all the lights and everything like that. He tells us where he wants them. And then he can see what my camera's seeing, so he can play to it. But he can't see anything else. He can't see where his feet are, except when he's looking at a tiny little thing and his goggle really close to his eye. Is an incredibly complicated thing he did on Eric. He had a team of puppeteers with him as well, who would help control an arm on occasion when he needed 2 arms, or Eric's eyes and ears. But to that work was incredibly complicated, and it relied upon an incredibly complicated system, which held up most of the time. But essentially, there's often a thing in a show which becomes the complicated thing. If you got some stunts, it's always hard because you've got stunts. If you've got a dog in a show, it's hard because the dog doesn't want to do the thing. On Eric, the sort of the curveball, the sort of the great unknown would be Eric. And when we pulled it out and we had to do very complicated things in a normal film set, yeah, it was tough. But when it's good, it's amazing. And when it's Ollie's there, and essentially when Ollie was in the Eric costume, he was sort of pretty much in character the whole time. And it's just really fun, and it turns everybody into little kids on set when there's a giant puppet talking to you in the Eric voice, and you're like, all right, okay, it's a bit weird. But yeah, so yeah, it was a great challenge, because that's a sort of curveball, that's a sort of unknown you don't want on your carefully run, carefully scheduled set, where you've got to do the nice lighting and make it feel a certain way and finish on time. You don't want this curveball of a giant monster thing. So yeah, it was a pain in the ass, but it was well worth it. And when it was good, it's great.
Well, fair play to the puppeteer controlling Eric, because that does sound like such a trip hazard. And then sort of performing, there's so many things that probably have to take into consideration as well.
There's a million things, and he's got to sort of perform, and he's got to act, and he's got to have a head, a hand in the head and a hand somewhere else, and do all these things and do it right the first time. And it's hot and uncomfortable in there, and if the sun's beating or if you're freezing cold or whatever it is, it's just a very difficult. And that dance scene at the end of Ep 3, that was a sort of full choreographed dance. And you see Benedict Cumberbatch doing it, you're like, oh wow, he's quite good at dancing, and you forget that there's a person inside this sort of giant 7 or 8 foot high costume which weighs 80 kilograms, whatever it is, doing the same thing. And so you just want to, when you're filming it, you want to make sure you get it right the first time, so you don't force Ollie to do it again. But that's what he gets paid for, and that's what he's good at, and that's his chosen profession. So I don't feel sorry for him, but I'm in awe of the skills it takes to do that. So that is sort of walking and talking and chewing gum and patting your head and rubbing your stomach all at the same time in a 7 foot high monster suit.
I'm also thinking like how strong they must be if they're doing the dancing and carrying that 80 kilos of weight.
Bloody strong and bloody minded as well. Just wants to do it. Just wants to do it good.
Yeah, fair play to them. I'm sort of conscious about the time, and I've got 3 questions, so hopefully I can get all of them in. So one of the questions as well is like, because you shot the show in Hungary and then parts of it in New Jersey and then a week in Manhattan, as a DOP, how do you tweak the sort of continuity between the different locations that you're shooting in?
It's really hard. Because you're shooting in Hungary, an interior in a set in the Anderson apartment. You're shooting, which is completely lit by not natural light. And you know that in 4 months' time, if that's in February in Hungary, and in 4 months' time, you're going to be on the streets of New York in May, and you're going to have a person walking into a building, and then it's going to cut into what you shot in February in a set build in Hungary. So how on earth can you guess what the weather's going to be like 4 months on a different continent? You don't. So you kind of, what I did, I just went, well, what's best for the scene here, and hope to get lucky, and then hope to be able to wangle things at the US end. So you kind of, if you need flat weather, you do it at sort of at the edge of dusk, so you don't have any hard sunlight. So and ultimately we just got really fucking lucky. So I made all those. I wish I had a secret to how we did it. I don't think there's any horrible, glaring sort of lighting, weather, time of day, continuity issues. There's 1 or 2 little things which we managed to tweak in the grade, but nothing which is a horrible clanger. There is no secret. Really, what we should have done, we should have shot the exteriors first in New York, and then shot all the interiors where we can control it. But it just so happened, for whatever reason, for lots of reasons, we couldn't shoot that way around. So yeah, just did my best guess, did what I thought was right for the scene, and then by hook or by crook managed to wangle it to work in when we were in America.
Yeah, incredible though. I don't think people would notice unless they went literally frame by frame. But yeah, it looks incredible. So I wouldn't have said. I thought all of it was shot in Hungary, so that's why I was quite impressed how it looked in New York. But whilst you're in another country, in a different location completely as well, it all seems seamless.
Good, great, job done.
My last question: what was your hardest scene to shoot?
What was the hardest scene to shoot? There is, I think, probably the hardest and probably the most fun, in fact, as well. There's an argument scene between Vincent and Cassie, between Gabby and Benedict, other Benedicts. I think in episode 2, which is a dusk scene. It's essentially we'd kind of loosely wound them up and let them go, and they march throughout the apartment. I think there's a couple of these. There's actually 2 of these scenes. I think we might have even shot them the same day. They march up and down their apartment having wicked arguments. And yeah, they're really hard because you're lighting for a big open space and you're trying to give mood, but you can't really light it. You're kind of just lighting the set as a whole. And also I was operating the camera and you're marching backwards fast up and down corridors, spinning around, trying to, the camera becomes a character, and the camera, swinging around the place really become the audience view between these 2 cast members. They're both amazing actors, and sort of what's exciting is that they're amazing actors, and it's me and a boom op on set and nobody else, just those two actors, me and the boom op. Everybody's cleared from set, and it's fantastic. It's like the best secret cinema in the world. I mean, you can pay, if you're a billionaire, you can pay for that experience to be, on stage with those 2 actors being part of the action. So it's fantastically exciting, but it's incredibly challenging. And to give it any kind of look which sits amongst the rest of the show is very tricky, and you try and throw every single little trick you possibly can, lighting wise, at it. But and second by second in the moment, it is very physical. And they're running up and down and they're tired. I've got a great camera on my shoulder. So, but rewarding at the end of it. And ultimately, you go, there's this massive argument between these 2 people, a couple of scenes with big arguments. And I go, yeah, I was there. I was right in the room. I was right in the middle of it all. I was the 3rd person in the room. It was great.
Yeah, and I think with something like that, it's a solid choice, but it's also, as you said, the best secret cinema that you can have because you're there and you're watching masterclass, really. But then also you have to pay attention with the movement of the camera on you so you don't get lost.
I fell over during one of those scenes. Little information for you there. Fell on my ass because I went backwards too fast and I clipped a wall and fell on my ass. But it was all fine. Picked myself up, kept on going.
Fair enough. Benedict, thank you so much for your time today. Eric is streaming now on Netflix. Go out and watch and appreciate Benedict's work. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you very much. You take care and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.